I didn't expect my marriage to fall apart 5 years after my husband died. That sounds dramatic, I know. At 72, you're supposed to be past that kind of thing. You bury your husband, you mourn, you adjust. You drink your tea a little slower, you talk to his chair, you complain about your joints. You don't wake up one Tuesday, open a dusty box in the basement, and realize you've spent the last 30 years loving a man you never really understood. But that's what happened to me. The letter was in an old metal toolbox, tucked under a layer of rusty screws and a cracked measuring tape. My name was on the envelope in his handwriting, the one I used to trace with my finger on birthday cards, to Margaret Asterisk. The date in the corner froze my breath, June 3rd, 1994. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. My grandson Ben was upstairs packing books into cardboard boxes, the radio playing quietly in the kitchen above my head. The house smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. My knees ached from the stairs. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and then stopped. It was such an ordinary moment to find something that would split our life into before and after. I knew exactly what year that was, even before I finished reading the date, 1994, the year I almost left him, the year I was sure, absolutely sure, he was cheating on me. For 3 decades, that year sat in my memory like a dark knot in an otherwise decent piece of wood. We moved on, we stayed married, we had Christmases and birthdays and grandchildren, but nothing was ever quite the same after 94. I told myself I'd forgiven him. I told myself all couples have something like that. And then I opened the letter and realized I'd been wrong about everything. If you'd met me at 30, you'd never have pictured me as the type of woman who'd be sitting in a half-empty house at 72, reading a dead man's confession in a damp basement. Back then I was, well, sharp is the word my sister used. Sharp tongue, sharp walk, sharp skirt suits for the office. I wasn't cruel, but I didn't suffer fools gladly. And my husband David was the calm to that storm. We met at a charity dance I didn't even want to attend. It's networking, my boss had said, as if that word could magically make small talk less awful. I was at the punch bowl, mentally drafting my resignation, when a man beside me muttered, "If I survive another conversation about interest rates, I'm jumping out the window." I laughed before I could stop myself. He glanced over, surprised, and smiled in that slightly crooked way that would later become so familiar I could see it in the dark. "That bad?" I asked. "Worse," he said. "I'm David. I'm starting to think I came just for the punch." We danced once, then twice. He wasn't particularly smooth, but he was attentive. He listened. That was the thing about him from the start. He really listened, as if what I was saying mattered more than anything else in the room. We married 2 years later in a small church with wilting flowers and my mother crying too loudly in the second row. I still remember how his hands trembled when he slipped the ring on my finger. Not from doubt, just from the weight of it all, I think. For a long time, our life was exactly what you'd expect from a middle-class couple in an English-speaking suburb. We bought a modest house with peeling paint and a garden that stubbornly grew more dandelions than roses. We had 2 children, Emma first and then Daniel 3 years later. There were school runs and PTA meetings, paychecks stretched with coupons, late-night talks at the kitchen table once the kids were asleep. We weren't glamorous and we weren't extraordinary, but I was certain we were solid. David worked as an accountant for a mid-sized construction firm. He liked numbers and routines. He made spreadsheets for everything, our budget, our holiday plans, even how many apples the kids ate in a week. I teased him about it and he'd shrug and say, "Numbers don't lie, Maggie, people do." I should have paid more attention to that sentence. Our arguments when they happened were over ordinary things. My mother's visits, his long hours during tax season, the time he forgot our anniversary because he was buried in a report. We were normal, predictable. And then in the early 90s, things shifted. At first, it was small. He started coming home later, a lot later. We'd gone through busy seasons before, but this was different. He'd show up at 9 or 10, sometimes after the kids were already in bed, smelling of cold air and strangers' cigarettes. There'd be a faint stress in his shoulders, like he'd spent the evening bracing for impact. "Work?" I asked, stirring the pot on the stove a little harder than necessary. "Yeah," he'd say. "Sorry, it's been crazy. The new client is a nightmare." He'd kiss my cheek, compliment dinner, ask about the kids. To anyone else, it might have looked completely normal. But when you've lived with someone for nearly 20 years, you notice when their eyes don't quite meet yours for a second too long. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I've never liked women who leap straight to drama, but then there were the phone calls. They started as hang-ups. The phone would ring at 9 or 10, and when I answered, there'd be silence. not the accidental kind, the heavy, breathing kind, the kind where you know someone is on the other end not speaking. "Hello, who is this?" I'd say. Click. The first time I assumed it was a wrong number. The second time, a teenager's prank. By the sixth or seventh time, a pattern began to emerge, and my stomach clenched whenever the phone rang after dark. One night I picked up, and instead of silence, there was a voice, a woman's voice, quiet, nervous. "Is David there?" she asked. My hand tightened around the receiver. "He's at work," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Who's calling?" A pause. I could hear distant traffic on her end, or maybe a television. "Just tell him Lisa called," she said, and hung up before I could respond. Lisa. Such a simple name, common even, but it might as well have been carved into my skull. When David got home that night, I was waiting at the kitchen table, the phone in front of me like evidence. "Who's Lisa?" I asked. He froze just for a second, just long enough. "She's a client," he said eventually, taking off his coat. "Why?" "She called at 10 at night on our home phone." He sighed, rubbing his temples, and sat down opposite me. "She's going through a complicated situation," he said. It's personal stuff she doesn't want the office to know about. I offered to help with her finances off the clock." I snorted. "How generous of you." His jaw tightened just enough for me to notice. "Margaret, don't start, she's a client." "Clients don't usually call married men at 10 at night," I snapped. "On their home number. How did she even get this number?" "I gave it to her," he said, "in case there was an emergency." My laugh came out brittle and ugly. "Right, an emergency." I can still see how his face changed then, not with guilt, but with something like hurt. He looked at me as if I'd reached across the table and slapped him. "You really think I'd do that?" he asked quietly. And here's the part I hate admitting. Even now, I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "I do." Looking back, I know there were 100 ways that conversation could have gone differently. I could have asked more questions, listened more carefully, noticed the way his hands shook slightly, not with anger but with frustration. I could have mentioned how scared I was rather than how angry. But I was 41, tired, stressed, and utterly convinced I was catching my husband in a cliché. Things escalated from there. We argued that night until midnight, voices raised enough that Emma came to the kitchen doorway, her big brown eyes wide. "What's going on?" she whispered. "Go to bed," I told her too sharply. "It's grown-up stuff." David slept on the sofa for 3 nights after that. When he came back to our bed, something had shifted between us. The air felt thicker, our conversations shorter. We moved around each other like people in a narrow hallway, afraid to brush against the old wound. We stayed together, people of our generation usually did. Divorce was still something that made neighbors whisper. Besides, there were bills to pay and children to raise. You don't dismantle a whole life over a few late nights and an overly familiar Lisa, do you? At least, that's what I told myself. But I never forgot. I watched him more closely. I checked phone bills. I smelled his shirt sometimes when he came home late. And every time he said, "I'm working late," a little voice in the back of my head whispered, "Of course you are." He tried in his clumsy way to repair things. He brought flowers more often. He suggested a weekend away, which we never quite got around to. He took more interest in the kids' school projects, as if to prove he was still the same man. And maybe that was the strangest part. In every other way, he was still the David I knew. He didn't start going to the gym suddenly or buying new cologne. His habits didn't change except for the late nights and the phone calls, which eventually stopped. We never talked about Lisa again. Not once. Time, I've learned, doesn't heal wounds so much as bury them in layers of grocery lists, birthdays, and doctor appointments. Life moved forward whether I wanted it to or not. Emma went to university, then came back home for a while when she couldn't find a job, then left again. Daniel joined the Navy, scaring me half to death, and came home with a tattoo I pretended to hate. My mother died. David's father followed a year later. We downsized from 2 cars to 1. Then 1 big TV to 2 smaller ones because David wanted to watch his crime shows without my commentary. There were good years after '94 too. I don't want to rewrite history just because of what I know now. We had trips to the coast, laughing as the wind tried to steal our sandwiches. We danced at Emma's wedding, my cheek against his shoulder, both of us older and thicker around the waist, but still moving in sync. He cried when Ben, our first grandchild, was born. I remember the way he held that tiny, squirming life like the most fragile treasure in the world. I'm a granddad, he kept saying as if he couldn't believe it. Maggie, I'm a granddad. If you had looked at us then, you'd have seen a normal, loving couple, people who'd weathered storms and come out stronger. That's what I presented to the world. That's what I tried to present to myself. But every so often, usually late at night, I'd lie awake and stare at the ceiling, remembering that quiet female voice on the phone. Is David there? I would glance at his sleeping profile, his mouth slightly open, the occasional snore. I'd feel a spike of old anger like acid and then push it down. We're too old for this asterisk, I'd tell myself. It's in the past, let it go. I never did, not completely. The last year of his life was fairly uneventful if you ignore the looming presence of mortality, which you don't at our age. He had some chest pains, a couple of hospital visits, stern lectures from doctors about cholesterol and stress, but they assured us these things were manageable. And then one ordinary morning, he went out to get the mail and collapsed on the front path. Massive heart attack. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. Grief at that age is strange. You don't fall apart like you do at 20. You don't have the luxury. There are funeral homes to visit and pensions to sort out, and children who are broken in their own adult ways. You become the center of a storm you didn't ask for. I cried in the shower where no one could hear me. I spoke to his side of the bed at night. I washed his mug for months after he died before finally putting it on the top shelf where I wouldn't see it every day. And through all that old question about Lisa stayed where I'd kept it for 30 years, in a quiet, bitter corner of my heart. I thought that was the story of our marriage, a good life with one ugly crack running through the middle, a crack I'd learned to walk around. Until 5 years after his death, my daughter bullied me into selling the house. You can't keep going up and down those stairs forever, Mum, Emma said, hands on her hips, looking so much like me at 40 it was almost unbearable. This house is too big for you. The boiler's ancient, the roof leaks, and you nearly slipped last winter. I did slip, I corrected. I just didn't break anything. She rolled her eyes. That's not comforting. I resisted at first. The house was our life. Every room held something of him. His slippers under the bed, his favorite mug, the half-finished crossword on the shelf that I never had the heart to throw away. But practicality has a way of winning at 72. The heating bills were getting ridiculous, and the stairs really did feel steeper every year. After a winter of creaky radiators and a spring of leaking gutters, I agreed to put it on the market. The sale was quicker than I expected. Suddenly, there was a date circled on the calendar when the house would no longer be mine. That did something strange to my brain. I started seeing everything as if through someone else's eyes. The chipped tile in the hallway, the worn patch on the carpet outside our bedroom door, the childish stickers still stuck to the underside of the dining table, remnants of a long-ago secret club Emma and Daniel invented. And the basement. The basement was always David's domain. It wasn't sinister or particularly messy, just his. Shelves of labeled jars with nails and screws, a workbench with tools hung on hooks like soldiers on parade, boxes of Christmas decorations, old suitcases, the usual. He used to say, "Don't worry about down there, Maggie, I've got it," whenever I suggested we reorganize. And I didn't. I had the rest of the house. The basement was his little kingdom of order. After he died, I went down only when necessary to drag up the artificial Christmas tree or an old suitcase. It smelled of concrete and old wood and that faint, metallic tang of tools. Every time I went down there, I half expected to hear him humming tunelessly as he fiddled with something on the bench. But now that I was moving, I didn't have a choice. The basement had to be cleared. Ben offered to help. He's 22 now, tall and sweet, and too attached to his phone, like most of his generation. He carried the heavier boxes up the stairs while I sorted through the smaller things. "Nan, what do you want to do with all these jars?" he called from the bottom of the stairs at one point. It's like he was starting a museum of screws. "Careful," I said automatically. "He'd haunt you for saying that." Ben laughed. I'd like to see him try. I smiled, then turned back to the shelf I was tackling, old tin boxes and plastic containers, each with its own history. It was there, behind a stack of brittle magazines and a cracked cooler, that I saw the toolbox. It was a metal thing with chipped red paint and a handle that had left a faint rectangular ghost on the wooden shelf over the years. I recognized it immediately. It was his father's toolbox originally. David inherited it when the old man died. He'd always been oddly protective of it. "Don't move that one, Maggie," he'd say, back when he was alive if I even touched it. "It's got delicate stuff inside." Delicate stuff, my foot. David could call a concrete block delicate if it suited him. Now, with no one left to scold me, I lifted it down. It was heavier than it looked. I set it on the workbench and flipped the clasps open, half expecting some sort of booby trap after all those years of warnings. Inside, it was disappointingly ordinary at first glance. Rusty pliers, a hammer with a splintered handle, an old measuring tape curled up like a sleepy snake, a few screws rolled around the bottom as I moved things aside. I almost closed it again. I almost put it straight into the donate pile without another thought. But something, call it instinct, or the annoying persistence of curiosity even in old age, made me lift the tray out to see what was underneath. There, wedged into the corner, was an envelope, cream-colored, slightly yellowed with age, the edges curled, my name on the front in his handwriting. To Margaret. The air changed. I know how that sounds, but it did. The basement, already cool, seemed to drop another degree. I heard my own breathing in my ears. I picked it up with fingers that trembled just enough for me to notice. The paper felt dry and fragile, as if it might crumble if I squeezed too hard. In the top right corner, in smaller writing, was a date. June 3rd, 1994. 30 years, 3 decades that I had lived above this basement, walking over that toolbox, making dinners and paying bills and laughing at sitcoms, never knowing that whatever this was, it was sitting just below my feet. Nan, you okay down there? Ben's voice floated down the stairs. I'm fine, I called back, though I wasn't sure that was true, just taking a break. I sat on the old stool by the workbench and stared at the envelope. Part of me wanted to shove it back where I'd found it, bury it under the tools and close the lid. Some doors, especially at my age, are better left unopened. What good could come from dredging up confessions written 3 decades ago by a man already in his grave? But I've never been very good at leaving questions unanswered. It's one of the reasons David fell in love with me. He once said, "You don't let go of things," he told me, kissing my forehead. It's infuriating and admirable at the same time. That stubbornness won. My thumb slid under the flap, and I broke the seal with a small, decisive rip. The letter inside was several pages long, written in the same neat, slightly slanted hand he used on Christmas cards and grocery lists. I could hear his voice in my head as my eyes scanned the first lines. Margaret asterisk. If you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to say any of this out loud when I should have. Or maybe it means something happened to me and you're trying to make sense of it. Either way, I'm sorry, first for what I've done, and second for the way I've handled it. My heart began to pound. For a moment, the basement blurred. I blinked and the words came back into focus, marching steadily across the page, dragging me back to 1994. That summer, I remember the heat most of all. Not just the weather, the tension. Heat in the way we snapped at each other over nothing. Heat in the sideways looks at the dinner table. Emma had just finished 6th form and was buzzing about going away to university. Daniel, 15 and moody, spent most of his time in his room with headphones on, listening to music that sounded like industrial machinery breaking down. David was working late. I was working part-time at the library by then, shelving other people's stories while mine felt increasingly complicated. One evening stands out clearly. He said he'd be home by 7. At 8:30, he still wasn't there. The spaghetti had congealed in the pot. I'd put it in the oven to keep warm, taken it out, put it back in. The clock above the stove ticked louder than usual. At 8:45, the phone rang. I snatched it up, already ready to unleash a few choicely worded questions, but it wasn't him. It was a woman again, the same hesitant voice from before. Is David there? She asked. Who is this? I demanded, though I already knew. Lisa, she said, I really need to talk to him. It's urgent. Something inside me snapped. Listen to me, I said, my voice low and shaking. You will not call this house again. Do you understand? You will not call my husband at home. If you have something to say to him, you say it at the office like everyone else. There was a long silence. When she spoke, her voice was smaller. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I don't know who else to call. And there it was, the line that inflamed every insecure part of me. Not my problem, I said and hung up. David came home at 9:20, smelling of sweat and the city. Before he could take his shoes off, I was on him. She called again, I said, your asterisk client asterisk. His shoulders sagged. Margaret. No more excuses. Either you tell me exactly what's going on or you pack a bag tonight. His face hardened, something in him, usually so calm, flared. "It's not my story to tell," he snapped. "I promised her I wouldn't drag her private life into this more than it already is." "Her private life? Are you hearing yourself?" I almost laughed. "Do you hear what that sounds like?" He slammed his hand on the table, hard enough to make the cutlery jump. Emma and Daniel in the living room went quiet. "It sounds like I'm trying to help someone in a bad situation," he said, "but my wife would rather believe I'm sneaking around like some middle-aged Romeo than trust that I might actually be doing something decent." I'd like to tell you that hearing that shook me, that I paused and thought, what if he's telling the truth? But pride is a powerful thing. "Well then tell me," I said. "If it's so decent, why is it such a big secret?" "Because her husband is violent," he exploded. "Is that good enough for you, Maggie? Are you happy now? You want all the details. You want to sleep at night knowing you dragged her mess into our house too." The room seemed to tilt. That was not the answer I'd expected. "What?" I said. "She's a client," he said tightly. "Her husband tracks everything, her calls, her spending, where she goes. He comes to the office sometimes. He's not a good man. She came to me because she wanted to squirrel away some money, in case she had to leave. I gave her this number as a backup, in case things went bad and she needed help fast, and I told her to only use it if she had no one else." I stared at him, trying to reconcile this with the picture in my head of a flirtatious coworker. It didn't fit, but the part of me that had already built the story of his betrayal wasn't ready to let it go. "How convenient," I said coldly. "You expect me just to take your word for it." Something in his expression closed. It was like watching a door slam. "I expect my wife," he said slowly, "after 20 years of marriage, to give me the benefit of the doubt." We didn't speak for the rest of the night. He slept on the sofa again. In the morning, he left for work before I woke up. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, washing a mug that wasn't his because his mug, a chipped one with a faded cartoon, was still sitting on the coffee table by the sofa. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger. I could have gone to him then. I could have said, "I'm scared, help me understand." I could have asked for details, demanded them, and maybe he would have told me everything. Instead, I made a decision I would regret for the next 30 years. I decided that even if he was telling the truth, it didn't matter. He had chosen another person's secrets over my peace of mind. He had brought fear into our house. He hadn't trusted me with the full story until I forced his hand. And under all of that, if I'm honest, was a more childish feeling. He had given another woman something that was supposed to be mine: his attention, his late nights, his phone number, his rescue. I didn't leave. We had children, a mortgage, a life, but something broke in me that summer. I built a new version of our marriage in my head, one where he had a flaw I could hold against him when I was feeling weak. He betrayed me, I'd think, when I felt lonely or unseen. I'm the one who stayed anyway. I'm the strong one. It's amazing how comforting a grievance can be if you cradle it long enough. All of that came rushing back as I sat in the basement with David's letter in my hands, my grandson's footsteps thumping faintly above me. I forced myself to keep reading. "The night we had that big fight, the one where you said you thought I was cheating, I almost told you everything," he'd written. "I came so close. I had it all on the tip of my tongue. Her name, her bruises, her boy hiding under the bed while his parents screamed. The way she sat in my office with her hands shaking so badly she couldn't sign the forms. But then I looked at you and I saw it in your eyes. You'd already decided. You weren't asking because you wanted to understand. You were asking because you wanted to be right." My cheeks burned, even decades later. "So I didn't tell you the whole story. I told you enough to make you angrier, not less. That's on me. I was proud too. I was hurt that you thought I was capable of that after everything we'd built. I didn't want to beg you to see me the way I saw myself." Here's what I should have said that night and didn't. The next paragraphs were dense, factual, the way he got when he was trying to calm himself down with details. Lisa, it turned out, really was a client. Her husband, Mark, owned a small business that David's firm handled. She'd come to the office one afternoon with a purple bruise blooming along her jaw, trying and failing to hide it under makeup. She asked to speak to someone privately about opening an account her husband couldn't access. "He knows everything I do," she told David, according to the letter. "He checks the statements, the mail, the mileage on the car. If he finds out I'm putting money aside to leave, he'll..." David didn't finish that sentence in the letter. He didn't have to. I could fill in the blanks. "I should have sent her to a shelter or a charity," he wrote, "but she begged me not to. She said if the police got involved, he'd find a way to make it worse. I don't know if that was true or just her fear talking, but I believed her, or maybe I just wanted to. He'd helped her set up a separate account under her maiden name forwarded to a P.O. box. He met her a few times after hours to go over the details, so her husband wouldn't see any paper trail. I thought I was being clever, he wrote. I thought I was being a good man, helping someone who needed it. I saw something of your sister in her, how lost she was after that bastard left her. I told myself if Margaret knew, she'd want me to help. I read that line 3 times. I'd never known he connected it to my sister, who'd been abandoned by her boyfriend when she got pregnant at 23. That had been a horrible time. We'd taken her in for months. David had built her baby's crib himself, sanding the corners smooth. Of course he'd thought of her, of course he had. But then he found out. The letter continued. Not everything, thank God, but enough to be suspicious. He came to the office and made a scene. Said he knew she was hiding something, that if I didn't tell him what it was, he'd drag it out of her one way or another. I told him I couldn't discuss clients' finances. He leaned over my desk and said, if my wife ever leaves me, I will kill her and anyone who helped her. I had to put the letter down at that and breathe for a moment, my heart pounding. That's when I realized how far out of my depth I was. I called a friend of mine whose wife volunteered at a shelter. We made sure Lisa had their number. We told her to call if things got worse. She promised she would. That's why I gave her our home number, Maggie. Not because I wanted some secret late-night romance, but because I was afraid that one night she'd be standing in the street with bruises and no shoes, and our phone would be the only lifeline she had. His words blurred again. An image rose unbidden. A woman standing on a dark pavement, holding a child's hand, looking up at a lit window, wondering if she dared call. The night she called, when you answered, asterisk, he wrote, asterisk, she'd just had a fight with him, a bad one. He'd smashed her phone, but she remembered our number. She went to a payphone down the street. She told me later she was shaking so hard she could barely dial. I felt sick. When you spoke to her, you didn't know any of that. I understand that. You heard a strange woman using your husband's first name and you reacted like anyone would. But when you hung up, she thought she'd ruined everything. She thought she'd put you in danger too. She panicked. She didn't call back. She didn't call the shelter either. My hands started to tremble. 2 weeks later, I read in the local news that a woman had been taken to hospital with serious injuries after a domestic dispute. The paper didn't use names, but the street was the same. The age, the description. I recognized her husband's business in the background of a photo of the police car. I called the number I had for her. No answer. I called the shelter. They said a woman matching her description had finally come in. Broken ribs, a concussion. Their son with a sprained wrist from where he'd been pushed when he tried to intervene. My stomach twisted. They got her out eventually, asterisk, he wrote. New identity, new town. I helped where I could, quietly. I diverted some of our savings to pad her account. Before you panic, it wasn't the pension. It was the holiday fund mostly, the one we were going to use for that trip to Italy. I remembered that, the Italy trip we never took because money was tight that year. I'd resented that quietly too. I told myself it was a worthwhile sacrifice, that you'd agree if you knew, that the look on her boy's face the first time they came into the bank without bruises was worth every missed gelato in Rome. But I also knew I was lying to you, not about cheating because I didn't, not once. God's honest truth, Maggie, I never touched her, never wanted to. She was a scared woman who reminded me too much of your sister for comfort. But I lied about where I was, what I was doing with our money, who I was talking to. And when you confronted me, I chose her fear over your trust. There it was, plain, unadorned, the thing that had sat between us for 30 years, finally named. You had every right to be angry, he wrote. What I didn't expect was how quickly you decided who I was. One late-night phone call and a few missed dinners, and suddenly I was the kind of man who'd throw away his family for a fling. It broke something in me too, you know. I don't think we ever talked about that. The way you looked at me, the disgust that stuck. I started to see myself through your eyes, untrustworthy, capable of anything. It scared me so much that I almost asterisk. The sentence trailed off there. The next words crossed out so violently the paper tore slightly. I squinted but couldn't make them out. I wrote this letter that night, he continued in a new line, the handwriting a bit shakier. I was going to leave it on your pillow and go sleep at my brother for a while, give you space. Let you read the whole story without us shouting over each other. But then I came upstairs and saw you asleep, curled up on my side of the bed, holding my pillow like it was a life raft. Your face was streaked with tears. You cried yourself to sleep like a teenager, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I realized you weren't just angry, you were scared. Scared of losing me, scared of looking like a fool, scared of waking up one day and realizing the life you'd built was a lie. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched you breathe, and I thought, if I give her this letter, it will become an argument, it will become evidence, something she brings up in every fight for the next 40 years. Remember when you lied about Lisa? So I folded it up and hid it instead, told myself I didn't need it, told myself we'd move on, and we did in our way. But from that night on, there was always a distance between us, something we never quite looked at directly. We carried on, raised our children, became grandparents. We had good years, I think, I hope you agree. But every time you narrowed your eyes when I said I was working late, every time you made a joke about mystery women at the office, a part of me wilted a little. I wanted to tell you so many times, especially after I saw Lisa in the supermarket years later with her boy. They looked free. She thanked me quietly near the frozen peas, and I wanted to march you over and say, see, this is what it was all for. But I'd promised her I wouldn't bring you into it. That was part of the deal. She didn't want any more lives tangled up in her mess than necessary, so I kept my mouth shut like a coward. That's the truth, Maggie, not a perfect truth. No one's hands are clean in this. I lied, I hid things, I made choices on your behalf without asking you, but I didn't do the one thing you always believed I did. I didn't cheat on you. I realized my mouth had fallen slightly open. I closed it, swallowed. There were a few more paragraphs after that, smaller confessions tucked into the big one. How guilty he'd felt about using the Italy money, how he'd secretly put a bit aside each month afterward to try and build it back up, but life kept getting in the way: car repairs, Emma's dental surgery, Daniel's driving lessons. By the time we could afford it again, he wrote, your knees weren't up to all those cobblestones. Life has a way of stealing the window from you while you're busy trying to protect other people's. There was a line about how much he loved me, not the grand, poetic kind, simple, almost clumsy. I'm writing this because I don't want to die with you thinking I was someone I wasn't, *, he finished. If we're lucky, I'll give this to you myself, and we'll sit at the kitchen table and argue and cry and maybe even laugh about how stubborn we both are. If we're unlucky, well, at least you'll know, even if it's too late to do anything about it. Whatever you feel when you read this, I accept it. Anger, relief, nothing at all. You deserve the truth, even if I'm 30 years late giving it to you. I love you, Margaret, I always did, in my clumsy, secretive way. David *. When I finished, I just sat there. The basement hummed quietly around me, the faint buzz of the freezer in the corner, the muffled thud of footsteps above, the distant whoosh of a car passing outside. My hands shook, my knees ached, my heart hurt in a way I hadn't felt even at his funeral. Because now, on top of grief, there was something else: shame. I had been so sure, so absolutely certain of the story I'd built. David, the good husband who'd made one big mistake. Me, the loyal wife who'd chosen to stay anyway. Now I had to confront a different possibility, that I'd spent 30 years punishing a man for a crime he hadn't committed, that I'd cut off some tender, vulnerable parts of our marriage not because he broke them, but because I did. And the worst part, he tried to tell me, in his own flawed way. He tried to do the right thing for a stranger and the right thing for me at the same time, and had failed at both. And instead of meeting him halfway, I'd retreated behind my pride and stayed there. Nan, Ben's voice came again, closer this time. I heard his foot on the first basement step. You sure you're okay? You've been down there forever. I scrambled to wipe my eyes. The tissue disintegrated a little on the rough paper of the letter. I'm fine, I called, my voice thick. Just found some old memories, I'll be up in a minute. He hesitated, then retreated. The door at the top of the stairs clicked shut. I read the letter again, then a third time. Each pass revealed some new small detail, some turn of phrase that sounded so exactly like him I could almost hear his voice. I thought of the countless tiny moments that now glowed in a different light, the times he'd gone quiet when domestic violence came up on the news, the way he'd always be extra patient with frazzled women at shops, stepping back in line to give them time to fish for their wallets, the faint, unreadable look on his face the few times Italy came up in conversation. What else had I misinterpreted? Anger bubbled up, sharp and confusing. Why didn't you just tell me? I muttered to the empty basement. Why did you let me walk around for 30 bloody years thinking you were a cheat? The answer, of course, was right there in the letter. Pride, fear, promises made to someone else. That stubborn streak of his, the mirror image of mine. I sat there for a long time, long enough that my legs started to go numb. Eventually, I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. My name stared up at me, written 3 decades ago by a younger version of the man I'd buried. I had a choice to make. I could put it back in the toolbox, close the lid, carry on as I had been with my version of our story intact, angry at a ghost who couldn't defend himself. Or I could take the letter upstairs, show it to the living people who still shared his blood and my life, risk shattering their memories as mine had been shattered, or maybe not shattered, rearranged. I've learned something in old age: secrets don't die with the people who keep them. They linger like a smell in the curtains. You can ignore them, pretend they aren't there, but they seep into your clothes all the same. I stood up, joints crackling in protest, and climbed the stairs with the letter in my hand. I found Emma at the dining table, sealing a box with packing tape. A streak of dust was on her cheek. When she looked up and saw my face, her expression shifted immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Are you feeling dizzy? Do you need to sit down?" "I'm fine," I said, though that wasn't exactly true. "But we need to talk, you and your brother, about your father." Her eyebrows shot up. That's never the start of a fun conversation. Daniel arrived an hour later, called away from whatever he was doing on a Sunday afternoon. He lives only 20 minutes away now, thank God. He came in with his usual mix of concern and annoyance. "If this is about you lifting heavy boxes, Mum," he started. "It's not," I said. "Sit." We gathered around the dining table, the same one where we'd done homework and blown out birthday candles and argued about curfews. The room was different now, half empty, but the table was the same. I placed the envelope in the center like evidence. "I found this in your father's toolbox," I said. "It's a letter he wrote in 1994 to me about something that happened between us." They exchanged a look. "Do you want us to read it?" Emma asked carefully. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to shield them from it. They had their own memories of their father. Did I have the right to color those with my newfound clarity? Then I remembered all the years they'd watched us dance around an invisible crack in the floor. "I do," I said, "because it concerns you too, whether you knew it or not, and because I need you to see the version of him I never did." I slid the envelope to Emma. She opened it gently as if the paper might bruise and began to read. Daniel leaned over her shoulder. I watched their faces change, confusion at first, then surprise, then a deep, quiet seriousness that made them both look older than they were. When Emma reached the part about the Italy fund, she let out a small sound. "That's why," she murmured. Daniel frowned. "Why what?" "Remember how you wanted to go on that school trip to Paris in '95, she said, "and Dad said we couldn't afford it. I was so angry with him. I thought he just didn't want to spend money on me." "You were angry with him about a lot of things," Daniel said softly. Then he looked at me. "You both were." "Can I see?" he asked, and Emma handed him the letter. He read the last page again, then set it down gingerly. "So he wasn't cheating," he said. "It wasn't a question." "No," I said, my voice wobbled. "He was." "How long?" Emma started, then stopped, choking back something. "How long did you think he was?" Daniel finished for her. I took a deep breath. "Since that summer," I said, "since the phone calls started, since I answered one and a woman asked for him by name, I jumped to the worst conclusion and I stayed there, even when he tried to tell me otherwise." Silence settled over the table like a heavy blanket. "I'm not proud of it," I added, "but it's the truth." Emma's eyes shone. "You two were so cold that year," she said quietly. "I thought it was my fault because I was leaving for university, or because I was always arguing with you about curfew." "Oh, love," I murmured, reaching for her hand. "No, it was never you, it was this, all of this, and we were too stubborn to sit down and explain it properly." Daniel picked up the letter again, staring at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something more familiar. "He helped that woman," he said. "He really helped her, and we never knew." "He wasn't a saint," I said quickly, defensive on instinct even now. "He still lied. He hid things from me. He made choices about our money without asking. But he did it because he thought he was protecting someone. He thought he was doing the right thing." "And you thought he was having an affair," Emma said. "Yes," I said, "and I treated him like he had, even when he stayed. Even when he brought you up, paid the bills, fixed the leaky sink, and fell asleep in front of the TV like any other middle-aged husband." "How long have you been carrying this?" Daniel asked. I looked at the envelope. 30 years, I said, give or take. He let out a low whistle. "That's a long time to be angry." I shrugged a bit helplessly. "You get used to it. It becomes part of the furniture. You stop noticing it until something knocks into it. Like a letter, Emma said. Like a letter, I agreed. We sat with it for a while, the truth, the years, the wasted chances. Finally, Emma spoke. Does this change how you feel about him? She asked. Now. Yes, I said honestly, and no. They waited. I always loved him, I said, even when I was furious, even when I told myself I was better than him because I hadn't strayed. That love was real. So were the good years, the laughter, the way he carried you piggyback upstairs when you were small, Daniel, or stayed up all night with you, Em, when you had the flu. I paused, feeling the familiar burn behind my eyes. But there were years I held him at arm's length, I continued. Years I weaponized my disappointment, and now I know he didn't deserve that, not like I thought he did. So yes, this changes things. It makes me see him as fuller, more flawed and more decent than I'd allowed myself to admit, and it makes me see myself differently too, which is uncomfortable at my age. Emma squeezed my hand. What do you mean? I mean I wasn't just the wronged wife, I said. I was also the one who refused to listen, who preferred the story in my head to the messy truth. It's easier to hate someone for something clear-cut than to love them through a complicated situation. Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. Guess I come by my stubbornness honestly, he said. You both do, I said. We all do, your father included. We talked for a long time after that, about David, about that summer, about all the little memories that now had new shadows or new light. At one point, Emma wiped her eyes and said, I wish he'd given you this when he wrote it. So do I said, but then again, would I have really heard it back then? Or would I have read it looking for inconsistencies, ways to prove myself right? She considered that, you at 41, she said, probably the latter. We laughed, and there was a kind of mercy in that. What are you going to do with it? Daniel asked, nodding at the letter. I looked at it, at my name on the envelope, at the dates. I don't know yet, I admitted. Part of me wants to burn it like he probably almost did. Let it go. Another part wants to keep it somewhere safe as proof that he was better than I gave him credit for. Maybe it's both, Emma said. Maybe you keep it, but you let go of what you've been telling yourself all these years. I smiled. When did you get so wise? About the time I realized my parents were human, she said. A week later, after the house had been emptied and the new owners were measuring curtains in what used to be our bedroom, I took a bus across town with the letter in my handbag. At the supermarket, I wandered the aisles aimlessly for a bit, pretending to shop, nerves fluttering in my stomach like they hadn't in years. I didn't even know if this was the right store. It had been so long. Places change, people disappear. But some things stay the same. I spotted her near the dairy section. I recognized her not because she looked the same, she didn't, but because of the way she held herself. A certain tightness in the shoulders, a way of scanning the aisle that I knew far too well from my own years of waiting for a shoe to drop. She was older, of course, gray streaks in her hair, lines around her mouth. But when she turned her head, I saw the profile I'd created in my mind from a single phone call, the woman who'd said, I don't know who else to call. Lisa. She had a basket hooked over her arm. Next to her was a man about her age, making some exaggerated point about yogurt brands that made her laugh. A real laugh, big, unguarded, unexpected. The sight hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so long thinking of her as a shadow in my marriage, a threat, a symbol. Seeing her as a whole person, buying groceries with a man who clearly adored her, felt strange, humbling. And beside them, reaching for a carton on the top shelf, was a young man in his late 20s. Broad shoulders, kind eyes. I didn't need anyone to tell me that was her son. He had her mouth, and something about the shape of his jaw reminded me of David in a way that startled me. Not in a sinister way, in the way kindness sometimes leaves similar traces on people who have been touched by it. I could have walked away, left her in peace. David had respected her wish not to entangle more people in her story. Who was I to break that now? But I'd come here with a purpose, even if it was half-formed. I approached slowly, heart hammering in my chest in a way I hadn't felt since asking my boss for a raise in 1982. Excuse me, I said. She turned, polite smile at the ready. It faltered when she saw my face, not because she recognized me, but because she recognized something in my expression. Yes, she said. The words tangled. I took a breath. Did you, by any chance, know a man named David Harper, an accountant years ago, your husband's firm maybe? Her eyes widened, the color drained from her cheeks. "My God," she whispered, "you're Margaret." Her partner looked between us, confused. Her son stepped closer, protective instinct kicking in. "Mum," he said. "It's okay," she said quickly, squeezing his arm. Her eyes never left mine. This is someone your father would have hated." I let out a short, surprised huff of laughter. "He's not the only one," I said. For a second, we just looked at each other. Two old women in a supermarket, ghosts of scared younger versions standing behind us. "I'm sorry," we both said at the same time. We stopped, then unexpectedly we both laughed. It was fragile but real. "You first," she said. I opened my handbag and took out the envelope, not the original but a photocopy I'd made. The real one stayed at home in a box with his things. This I could share. "I found this last week," I said. "In his toolbox. It's a letter he wrote about you, about what he did, about what I thought he did." She took it cautiously, reading the first lines. Her lips parted. She flipped through the pages, eyes skimming. Her son leaned in, trying to see. "Is that," he began. "It's a letter from the man who helped us leave your father," she said softly, "the one I told you about." He raised his eyebrows. "The accountant." "Yes," she said, "the accountant." She read in silence for a few minutes, right there between the yogurts and the cheeses. I watched the same emotions cross her face that had crossed mine in the basement: surprise, pain, gratitude, regret. When she finished, she pressed the papers to her chest like a strange sort of prayer. "He really wrote all this?" she asked. "Yes," I said, 30 years ago, and then he hid it. I only found it because I'm selling the house." She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "I always wondered," she said. "After we left, I always wondered what happened to him, if he was okay, if his wife," she trailed off, looking at me. "You must have hated me." "I did," I said bluntly. "No point lying at this age. I thought you were sleeping with my husband. I thought you'd ruin my marriage." "And instead," she said, "he ruined it himself by trying to help me in secret." "I ruined it too," I said, "by not trusting him, by not listening, by choosing a simple lie over a complicated truth." We stood there in the hum of the fridges, the weight of our pasts hanging between us. "I wanted to thank you," I said eventually. "Not just him, you, for surviving, for getting out, for making his stupid, secretive, noble little efforts mean something. It doesn't erase what it cost us, but it helps." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I didn't know he'd paid that price," she said. I thought he went home to a wife who knew everything and approved. I told myself he must have, to feel okay helping me the way he did. I didn't let myself think that he might be lying to you too." Her son spoke up then, tentative. "You're the one who answered the phone," he said, "that night when Mum called your house." I looked at him. He had faint scars on his wrist, pale and thin. My throat tightened. "Yes," I said, "I am." "I hated you for a long time," he said, "when I was a kid. Mum said you hung up on her, that she tried to get help and the wife said no. I built this image in my head of this horrible woman who didn't care if we lived or died." He shrugged, a bit sheepish. "Kids need villains. Your husband was the hero. You were." I swallowed. It was like being handed a mirror. "I'm sorry," I said. "I was scared and jealous and immature, and I took it out on a stranger. It doesn't excuse it. I'm just sorry, truly." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You look like my gran," he said. "She used to hang up on telemarketers. I'll try to update the mental picture." We all laughed, the tension easing a little. Lisa placed the copies of the letter back in the envelope, but kept it in her hand. "Thank you for bringing me this," she said. "It means more than you know." "Thank you for letting me," I said. I don't know what I was hoping to get from this. Closure, maybe, or just a chance to say out loud that I was wrong about him, at least to someone else who knew him in that part of his life. She smiled, small but genuine. "He was a good man," she said, "a foolish one sometimes, too willing to carry other people's burdens without asking for help, but a good man. I'm glad you got to see that, even if it's late." "So am I said. We parted then, each pushing our carts in opposite directions, our lives touching briefly in the middle of a supermarket after 3 decades of being tangled in each other's shadows. I live in a smaller flat now, no stairs. The kettle is closer to the living room than the bathroom, which feels like a design flaw but is probably just my old bones complaining. On the dresser in my bedroom, there's a wooden box with a few of David's things: his watch, his wedding ring, which I took from his hand at the funeral home with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else, a photo of us on the beach, younger and sunburnt, and laughing at something the photographer had said. And in an envelope that's a little more worn now, the letter. I don't read it often, I don't need to. It's etched into me now, not every word, but the shape of it, the truth of it. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the traffic outside has died down to a distant hum, I sit on the edge of my bed and talk to him. Old habits die hard. You were an idiot, I tell him, a kind one, but still an idiot. I imagine him chuckling, that soft, self-deprecating laugh. I wasn't much better, I add. We were a pair, weren't we? I think about all the things I'd say if I could really talk to him one more time, how I'd apologize for the decades of suspicion, how I'd ask him questions about the parts of his life I never really saw, how I'd tell him I'm proud of him for helping that woman, even if I hate the way he went about it. Most of all, I think I'd tell him this. I wish we trusted each other enough to be honest, not just about the big things, but the small ones, the fears, the insecurities, the stupid, childish jealousy we both pretended we were too grown up to feel. Because that, I've come to realize, is what really broke us, not the late nights or the phone calls, but the silence, the assumptions, the stories we told ourselves in the dark instead of saying, I'm scared, help me understand. If you're expecting some grand moral, I don't really have one. Life isn't a neat story, no matter how the young people on YouTube like to package it. It's messy and out of order and full of letters that go unread in toolboxes for 30 years. But if I've learned anything, sitting here with my tea and my aching joints and my ghost of a husband, it's this. The stories we believe about the people we love are powerful. They shape how we treat them, how we forgive them, how we remember them. And sometimes those stories are wrong. If you're lucky, you get a letter or a conversation or a supermarket aisle moment that forces you to rewrite them before it's too late. I wasn't that lucky. I got mine 5 years after the man it was about was put in the ground. I can't go back and give him the clean slate he deserved when he was still here to see it. I can't give us the trip to Italy or the years we could have spent closer instead of circling that old wound. But I can do this. I can tell our children the truer story. I can let go of the grievance I've held like a trophy. I can look at his picture and see not a cheat, but a flawed, frightened, fundamentally good man who made some hard choices and some stupid ones, just like I did. And I can sit in my little flat, watching the light move across the wall, and feel something I never expected to feel at 72. Not bitterness, not regret, although there's plenty of that, but relief. Relief that even if my marriage wasn't what I thought it was in some ways better, more complicated, more human, more worthy of the love I gave it. I didn't expect to fall in love with my husband again after he died. But that's what that letter did. It didn't make our story perfect, it just made it honest. And at my age, I've learned that honesty about who we are, who we were, and who we failed to be is the closest thing we get to peace.